Well, it's flu season, which means it's time to get a quarantine going. just, just play the intro, please.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
So Quarantine is actually a book I've been wanting to read for a couple of years now. I remember it when it came out, and I looked at it and I said, well, that looks kind of cool. And I just never got around to it until recently. And I gotta say, it was worth the wait. This was actually pretty damn good, and I quite enjoyed it. Now, as the title oh so subtly implies, this book is about a quarantine. See, at the very beginning of it, the main character, David, and his younger brother, Will, are going into high school, and their high school, there's just a big explosion, and it turns out that there's some sort of a virus going around. It kills all the teachers, but it leaves all the teenagers alive, and the military comes over, quarantines the whole place, and tells them, look, once the virus leaves your body, you can leave. However, that'll take a while, so you just gotta stay here for now. And after that, it's just sort of a Lord of the Flies thing, you know? It's these kids are trying to survive, and with very little food, they start forming their own gangs and fighting each other, and it's honestly really good. Like I said, it's just like Lord of the Flies, but it's different enough that it didn't feel like a total ripoff. So let's talk about what this book does right. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is that it feels pretty hardcore. What I mean by hardcore is that this book just feels really raw and real. You know, there's a big tendency, especially in the young adult world, for books to have a setup like this where there's a whole lot of potential for violence and conflict, but then they just sort of shy away from it. You know, they don't really show the blood and gore, the characters don't swear or have sex or anything like that, and this book doesn't do that, you know? These are actual teenagers. They feel like actual teenagers, you know? They have sex with each other, obviously, that's what teenagers do. I mean, not me, but that wasn't my choice. That's just how it worked. They swear a lot, you know, like, I didn't know you could say fuck more than once in a book and still have it labeled as young adult, but this says it plenty of times. And then there's violence. This doesn't shy away from the violence. It goes into gory, graphic detail about it. You know, people get limbs cut off, they get stabbed, and they get their heads smashed in. It's pretty fucked up, but I liked that because it really does make this whole thing feel more dangerous. It makes it feel more real, and it just makes it better. I also really liked most of the main characters. Now, Dave, I'll get to him in a minute, but he started off okay, at least. You know, he kept my attention in the book. But, you know, his brother Will is also really good, you know? Because when I started reading this, at the beginning, Dave is just protecting Will. And so I thought, okay, so Will's not going to have much personality. He's just going to be the innocent younger brother that Dave has to try and protect. He's a metaphor for his childhood innocence, etc. But I was actually pleasantly surprised because Will is an asshole. Yeah, he's a giant asshole, and he's dumb, and he constantly gets into trouble and gets his brother into trouble a couple of times too, but I liked that about him. You know, he has actual personality. He has character depth. He has growth. You know, he starts growing beyond that sort of thing. Even if he did frustrate me quite a bit, I just loved reading about him because I always knew he could be better than what he's doing, and I liked that. There's a couple other main characters too, like there's you know, the villain Sam, and there's another girl named Lucy that has kind of a love triangle with Will and Dave, and that was kind of dumb, but, you know, her character on its own is good. And then there's Hillary, who's Dave's ex-girlfriend, and she's kind of weird, but very interesting as well. And, you know, they're all kind of like Will. You know, they all have depth to them. You really get inside their head, and I just really liked reading about all of them. You know, there wasn't a single point where one of their POV parts came up and I started thinking, oh shit, this guy again. No, I enjoyed all of it. Now, the plot to this is a little bit of a mixed bag because I liked the way it started off, and I'll admit that it wasn't too predictable for the most part, But after the first, say, like 20 or 25% of the book, it's it just becomes a little. It just felt more standard, I guess. It felt a little paint by numbers, because at the beginning it's just Dave and Will being loners and trying to stay away from the gangs and just trying to get enough to eat. But then after that, it becomes more about like big battles and oh how am I going to protect all my friends and that sort of thing, and that was a little weird. So plot was a bit of a mixed bag, but at the same time, it's really, really fast-paced. There's always something going on. They never dwell on any particular plot points too long, with the exception of the climax, which just dragged on too much and I didn't like, but it didn't sink anything for me. Now for the things I didn't like. Number one being David. So, I feel kind of weird about this, because the first couple chapters, I did really like him, I think I said already. That's just when he's in his normal life before the quarantine starts, and apparently his mom died, but it actually ties into his character. Holy shit, it's not just, like, a thing that they throw in there to give him a tragic backstory. Like, no, he actually is very affected by his mother's death, and it affects his friends and his family as well, and they talk about how, hey man, you've changed, why are you like this? And honestly, that blew my mind way more than it should have, because that just never ever happens. And so that was cool. And then we also see that he's kind of an angry, bitter prick, which is reasonable because, we also find out that his girlfriend is cheating on him at the beginning. So, oh wow, that really sucks for him, and he gets into fights for it, and it's just understandable, and we're really getting into this guy's head and going, wow, okay, I like that. And then the quarantine starts, and he's just all about looking after his brother and keeping himself out of trouble. And again, I liked that. He's kind of a, maybe loner isn't the right word, but he's just a guy trying to do his own thing, not really trying to be evil, not really trying to be good, just surviving. And I did enjoy that. But then, later on, honestly kind of out of nowhere, he just decides that he wants to be a leader and he wants to protect people and fight back against evil, and it just... There's no build-up to it, and he also just becomes like a really standard hero character, and that was disappointing, to say the least. I also didn't like the prologue of this, which I honestly feel really, really pedantic even bringing this up, because the prologue is like 3 pages long, but it shouldn't have been there. It's just 3 pages long. It cuts ahead to like a year after the quarantine starts, and they're about to start a battle over the food, and then as soon as the battle starts, it cuts away back to the beginning when David is finding out his girlfriend cheated on him, and the quarantine hasn't started yet, and the prologue really doesn't tie into anything. Like, all it says is that, oh yeah, it's dangerous here. Well, we already knew that. Like, you could have just cut that out, and it would have been fine. And like I said, it's a really little thing, but it bothers me way more than it probably should have. The other thing I don't like is that we don't really get to see the society inside the school form. We see it when it's fully formed, and it's actually pretty neat to see all the different roles that these different gangs have, and what sort of politics there are, like who's friendly with who, and who exactly is powerful, who's weak, that sort of thing. And I did really like that, but, right after the quarantine starts, it shows the first 2 weeks in a little bit of detail, and then it skips ahead an entire other year, so we don't really see how this whole thing forms. We just see the beginnings of it, and then we see how it ends up. So that was that was disappointing as well, because this really should have been all about that new society forming, and just not getting that is, it feels like eating a cake without icing. It's still good and all. The cake is fine. I miss the icing. The icing has all the sugar in it. I think I just about covered all the bases, though. This is a pretty simple book overall, to be honest. Like, I could talk about how the virus doesn't really make sense, but, it's just a plot device. It doesn't need to make all that much sense from a scientific standpoint. And I could talk about, specific instances where Will annoyed me, or specific little plot points that were kind of weird, but overall none of it was too bad, and it's just a pretty simple story. So would I recommend this? Yeah, to pretty much anyone. But like, if you just read the summary to this and you say, yeah, that sounds like something I'd like, then yeah, you'll probably like this. But if you read it and say, that doesn't sound like my thing, then you won't enjoy it. So just go out and find out for yourself, because I did quite enjoy this one.